At 6:43 on a pale October evening, when the lights along Lowbridge Quay were just beginning to tremble on the Cress River, Gideon Parr walked into the dock office with rain on his shoulders and a woman's canvas bag held against his chest as if it were something breakable. The river cruise had ended 14 minutes earlier. 31 passengers had come down the gangplank laughing under umbrellas, complaining about the cold, thanking the crew for cider and little paper cups of chowder. One passenger had not come down at all. Gideon did not shout when he reached the counter. That was one of the details people remembered later, after everything else had been cut apart and examined under harder light. He stood in front of the dock clerk, his face drained, his fingers closed around the strap of the bag, and said he needed the police because a woman had gone missing from his boat. He said her name slowly, with the care of a man afraid to get a foreign name wrong. Marlene Nachname, German, traveling alone. Seat 22 on the upriver side. Burgundy raincoat, gray scarf, small black suitcase left under the bench, last seen near the stern rail before Amber Lock. The dock clerk, Liza Fern, thought he was in shock. Gideon Parr was not the kind of man who made scenes. He owned the excursion boat Sundial, a white two-deck river vessel with brass lamps, polished rails, and painted maps of vanished mills along the cabin walls. He gave schoolchildren tours in May, retirement groups in August, and slow leaf-watching cruises in October when the hills above the Cress turned copper and the water carried the smell of wet stone. He knew the river markers by number. He knew where old ferry chains still lay under the mud. If Gideon said someone had vanished, people believed the river had taken her. He called emergency dispatch himself from the black phone in the dock office because Liza's hands were shaking. His voice on the recording was low, controlled, but torn at the edges. He told the dispatcher he had completed a passenger count after docking and discovered that one tourist was missing. He said they had searched the cabin, both decks, both restrooms, the galley, the storage closet, and the mooring platform. He said her bag was still aboard. He said the passenger had asked him earlier about standing outside for photographs near Amber Lock, where the current tugged hard against the guide wall. When the dispatcher asked if anyone saw her fall, Gideon went quiet for 2 seconds too long, and then said no. That pause became the first shape of the case, though no one understood it then. Patrol cars came with their tires hissing on the wet bricks. A county rescue truck rolled down to the quay with floodlights strapped to its roof. 2 officers boarded the Sundial and moved through the warm cabin, while the crew stood near the snack counter with their aprons still on. The boat smelled of cider, diesel, damp wool, lemon cleaner, and the faint metal breath of the river. Paper napkins lay crumpled in baskets. A child had left a red mitten on a bench. Outside, the Cress moved black and smooth past the hull, carrying yellow leaves flat as coins. Gideon showed them seat 22. Under it sat a small black suitcase with a yellow tag from a discount luggage brand. The canvas bag he had carried to the office contained a folded town map, a German-language guidebook to American river towns, a cheap fountain pen, a packet of ginger biscuits, and a pair of reading glasses in a hard case. There was no wallet, no phone, no passport. Gideon said the passport scan was in the reservation folder, as required for foreign passengers on the extended lock route. He produced the folder with shaking hands. The scan looked ordinary to the first officers. A pale woman with light hair stared out from the copied page, unsmiling in the flat way of official photographs. The name beneath the image was Marlene Nachname, born in Hamburg, 36 years old. The scan was grainy, the numbers hard to read, but that was not unusual. The printer in Gideon's ticket office had been smearing black ink all season. The reservation showed that she had booked 8 days before the cruise through the website, paid with a prepaid travel card, and requested a window seat. The email address was long, dull, and forgettable. The phone number carried an international prefix, but rang to nothing when an officer tried it. By 8:10, the river search had begun. Floodlights cut across the surface near Amber Lock. Volunteers walked the towpath with flashlights, calling a name that sounded stranger each time it left their mouths. Marlene, Mrs. Knockname, Miss Knockname. The rescue boat circled the pilings beneath the old sugar warehouse. Divers were not sent down until morning because the current near the lock was too dangerous in the dark. Gideon stayed on the quay until after midnight, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, answering the same questions again and again without complaint. He said she had boarded late, just as the crew was pulling the ramp. She had shown him her printed ticket and apologized in careful English. He remembered the accent because his grandmother had been from Bremen, and he had tried one phrase of German with her. She smiled, he said, but did not encourage conversation. She sat alone, drank tea, read the guidebook, and spent most of the cruise looking out the window. A retired couple from Braxley remembered the burgundy coat. A college student remembered a woman in a gray scarf asking whether the stern deck would be open after the second lock. A mother with 2 children remembered the same woman standing at the rail as the boat passed the broken smokestack of Lander Mill, her hair lifting in the wind. There were enough fragments to make her real. That was what mattered in the first hours. The missing tourist had a seat, a bag, a passport scan, a reservation, and witnesses who had noticed the color of her coat. She had left behind small objects with the careless intimacy of travel: reading glasses, biscuits, a pen. The search teams did not ask whether Marlene Knockname had existed before she stepped onto the sundial. They asked where the river had carried her after she disappeared. The official theory settled quickly because it was mercifully simple. She had gone onto the stern deck shortly before Amber Lock. The crew had been serving cider in the cabin. Wind had pushed rain across the open stern. The rail was legal but low, built years before the newest safety recommendations. A tourist trying to photograph the lock gate might have leaned out, lost footing on the wet deck, and fallen between the boat and the guide wall. The engines were loud at that point. Passengers were inside. No one would necessarily hear a cry. Gideon blamed himself before anyone else could. On the second morning, with news crews standing under blue tents near the river steps, he looked into 3 cameras and said that a guest had been lost under his care. His voice broke once, not theatrically, but as if the words had caught on something in his throat. He promised to cooperate fully. He paid for extra search boats after the county scaled back. He printed missing person flyers at his own expense, using the passport scan because there was no better photograph. He closed the sundial for 9 days and refunded every autumn reservation. People brought food to his office. Pastors prayed with him. A German flag appeared beside the flowers taped to the railing at Lowbridge Quay. Detective Lynette Vargo did not like cases that became public before they became clear. She was 48, patient, narrow-faced, and known in the county department for reading files until the staples came loose. She took over on the 3rd day after the first search found nothing but driftwood, a tire, and part of a broken picnic table. Her partner, Detective Abram Holt, walked the boat with a flashlight while she interviewed Gideon in the forward cabin. The sundial was quiet then, empty of passengers, rain ticking on the roof. Gideon sat with both hands flat on the table. His wedding ring made a pale groove in his skin, though he had been widowed for 6 years. Lynette noticed details like that and did not decide what they meant too early. He gave his timeline again. Boarding began at 3:10, departure at 3:28, first narration at 3:40, tea service at 4:05, passing Lander Mill at 4:37, Amber Lock at 5:18, stern deck open from 5:05 to 5:24. Marlene last seen by passenger testimony around 5:14. Crew member Corbin Tate closed the stern rope after the lock. No one noticed the empty seat because passengers moved around during the return. Docking at 6:29, final count at 6:41, call at 6:43. It was neat, but not too neat. There were small uncertainties. Corbin could not swear whether the missing woman came back inside after the lock. The snack attendant, Della Morse, remembered collecting a cup from seat 22, but could not remember if Marlene herself handed it to her. The retired couple thought the woman had spoken with a man near the rear stairs, but they could not describe the man beyond a brown cap and square shoulders. A 12-year-old boy insisted he saw the woman leave the restroom after amber lock, but he had been playing a game on his father's phone and admitted he might have seen her earlier. Lynette sent the passport scan to federal contacts. She requested payment records, website logs, and the passenger manifest. She asked hotels whether a German tourist had checked in under that name. No one had. A room had been reserved at the Sparrow Bank Inn with the same prepaid card, but the guest never arrived. The international phone number was inactive. The email account had been created 11 days before the cruise and accessed from public networks. A library terminal in another county, the Wi-Fi outside a closed garden center, and once from the parking lot of a roadside motel that no longer kept camera recordings past 72 hours. That bothered Lynette, but it did not yet break the case. Travelers did strange things. Prepaid cards existed because people used them. Tourists changed plans. Foreign records moved slowly. And the river, after heavy rain, often gave nothing back. The German authorities did not respond quickly. The request passed through federal channels, then consular channels, then a missing citizen liaison who asked for a clearer passport image. Gideon's office could not provide one. He said the booking software compressed uploaded documents automatically. He had never met the woman before the cruise. He did not know where she had stayed the night before. He had not handled her passport in person because online booking allowed passengers to upload identification beforehand and present only the ticket at boarding. It was careless, perhaps, but not criminal by itself. Many small tourism businesses used systems built by cousins, friends, and discount contractors. The world was full of weak portals and bad scans. Lynette kept pressing. She drove to the public library listed in the internet logs and interviewed the evening clerk, who remembered no German woman, but did remember a man in a dark rain jacket, using the far terminal to print several pages. That would have mattered more if the clerk could identify him. She could not. Lynette canvassed the garden center and found only a dog walker who had seen an older pickup idling near the curb that week. There were hundreds of older pickups in Crest County. The prepaid card had been bought with cash in a supermarket 2 towns away. The cashier remembered nothing. In the first month, suspicion turned toward the man in the brown cap. The retired couple, Mo and Beatrice Lask, were certain they had seen someone leaning close to Marlene near the rear stairs. Beatrice said the woman looked uncomfortable. Mo said the man had the build of a dock worker. Their memory grew firmer with each interview, as memories sometimes do when frightened people are asked to be useful. A name surfaced from the key: Alder Pym, a former deckhand who sold hand-carved walking sticks to tourists and had been banned from the sundial after shouting at Gideon over unpaid wages. Alder wore brown caps. He had square shoulders. He spoke enough German to greet tourists because his mother had run a boarding house near the old ferry steps. Reporters liked him as a suspect immediately. His house leaned under sycamores on a muddy lane. He had a temper. He had once served 6 months for breaking a man's jaw outside a tavern. When detectives searched his shed, they found a gray scarf on a nail. For 2 weeks, Alder Pym became the story. He denied knowing Marlene Nachname. He said the scarf belonged to his sister. His sister said it did not. He admitted he had been on the quay that afternoon, but said he never boarded the sundial. Gideon told police he had not seen Alder on the boat, then apologized for being unable to help more. The press used an old mugshot, darkened by bad reproduction. Volunteers who had once brought casseroles to Gideon now left angry messages on Alder's door. Someone broke one of his windows. Lynette did not clear Alder quickly, but she never liked how neatly he fit. The scarf had no blood, no hair, No river mud beyond what any scarf in a dockside shed would gather. No passenger identified him with confidence. The ticket scanner had no record of an extra passenger, and the deckhand said they would have noticed him because Gideon had warned them not to let Alder aboard. When Lynette asked Beatrice Lask to describe the man without looking at photographs, she described Gideon in small ways without knowing it. The same weatherproof jacket, the same habit of resting one hand on the stair rail, the same silver at the temples. But when asked directly whether it had been Gideon, she recoiled. Gideon was the captain. Gideon was helping. Months passed, and the crest lowered itself into winter. The riverbanks hardened. Search dogs lost interest in trails washed clean by rain and frost. Divers worked 3 more times near Amber Lock and found nothing human. The missing tourist's face faded on flyers taped inside bakery windows, the copied passport image turning gray at the edges. German-language forums shared the story briefly, then moved on. The consulate reported that it could not verify the citizen from the scan provided, but that did not make headlines because bureaucratic uncertainty sounded less dramatic than a fall into black water. Gideon reopened the sundial in late November. He did it quietly, with half-capacity cruises and a new chain across the stern deck. Before each trip, he told passengers that the river was beautiful but unforgiving. People praised him for honesty. In December, he donated the first week's proceeds to a water rescue charity. In January, he spoke at a county safety meeting and asked for better lighting at Amber Lock. By March, his grief had become part of the town's idea of him. He was the captain who had lost a tourist and carried the blame like a stone in his pocket. Lynette kept a box under her desk, labeled with the name on the manifest. Inside were copies of the reservation, the passport scan, passenger interviews, maps of current speed near the lock, search reports, and photographs of the bag's contents. She looked at the name often. Marlene Nachname. It had a blunt, almost artificial sound, but she did not speak German and had no reason to trust her ear. She had grown up with surnames that sounded like occupations, colors, towns, animals, tools, and weather. A strange surname was not evidence. It was only a strange surname. The case cooled not because anyone solved it, but because daily life is a patient thief. New emergencies arrived. A warehouse burned. A teenager ran away and was found in a bus station. A body came up near the county line and turned out to be a man missing from a different state. Abram Holt transferred to financial crimes after his second child was born. Lynette inherited a new partner, Devlin Say, who was careful and young and too polite to ask why she still kept the river cruise box close enough to touch with her shoe. The first real crack came 9 months after the cruise, on a hot July morning when the river smelled green and low. The State Missing Person Clearinghouse had started a foreign national reconciliation project after an unrelated records failure embarrassed 3 agencies at once. Old cases involving foreign visitors were being checked against consular replies, visa documents, and local reports. The work was dull, clerical, and exactly the sort of work that saves a case, because lies often survive drama better than paperwork. Kirsten Adler, a civilian analyst hired for the project, opened the scan from the sundial case at 9:17 a.m. She was born in Stuttgart, raised in Ohio, and had spent 12 years translating insurance claims before joining the clearinghouse. She enlarged the copied passport until the letters broke into blocks. Then she sat back from her monitor and laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because the error was so stupid and so cruel that her body did not know what else to do. She called Lynette before lunch. Detective Vargo expected another request for a clearer scan. Instead, Kirsten said, "There is no German woman named Marlene Nachname in this document." Lynette was standing in the hallway outside an interview room, holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold. "You found a death notice?" "No," Kirsten said. "I found a label. Lynette did not understand. The supposed surname, Kirsten said, is Nachname. That word means last name. It is the word printed on blank German forms to tell you where the surname goes. The birthplace line says Musterstadt. That means sample city. The postal code is the basic placeholder sequence. This is not a damaged passport. It is a fake made from a template by someone who did not understand what they were copying. The hallway seemed to narrow around Lynette. The case box under her desk, the flyers, the river searches, the news conferences, Gideon under a blanket with rain on his shoulders, all of it shifted in one breath. "Are you saying the passport is false?" she asked. "I am saying the person on your manifest was named the equivalent of Marlene last name from Sampletown," Kirsten said. "No German official would issue this. No German traveler would hand it over. Whoever created this did not know German. They only knew how German looked." Lynette closed her eyes. The name that had sounded awkward for 9 months became suddenly bright and brutal. Not a surname, a field label, not a lost tourist, a space filled in by a liar. By 2 Hager that afternoon, the sundial case stopped being a presumed accident and became a staged disappearance. Lynette pulled every report back onto her desk. She asked for Gideon's booking software, not screenshots, but the server files. She asked the consulate for a formal fraud statement. She requested a fresh interview with every crew member. Devlin Sae drew a new timeline on the whiteboard and erased the word fall so hard that dust streaked under his hand. The first problem was practical. 9 months had ruined almost everything that should have been seized in the first week. The sundial had been repainted below the rail. The stern deck boards had been sanded and sealed. The website vendor had migrated the booking system in February, overwriting old logs. The canvas bag had been handled by officers, crew, reporters, and Gideon before anyone treated it as a prop instead of a lost woman's property. Passengers had scattered across 6 states. Memories had hardened into stories. The river had risen, frozen at its edges, thawed, flooded, and dropped again. The second problem was worse. If Marlene Nachname had never existed, then the central question wasn't where she went. It was why someone needed the town to search for her. Lynette began with Gideon Parr, because all staged stories have a first storyteller. He arrived at the station in a clean blue shirt, his hair combed damp, looking older than he had in October. When Lynette told him the passport had been identified as a fake, his reaction was almost perfect. Confusion first. Then embarrassment, as if he should have caught it. Then anger at whoever had used his boat. He pressed his knuckles to his mouth and whispered, "So she was traveling under a false name?" "Maybe," Lynette said. Or, "Maybe there was no she." He looked wounded by the suggestion. "People saw her. People saw a woman in a coat. A German woman? Did she speak German to you?" He hesitated, and for the first time, Lynette saw him choose between memory and usefulness. I greeted her. She smiled. "What did you say?" He looked down at the table. "I don't remember exactly." "You told officers you tried a German phrase because of your grandmother from Bremen." "I may have said good afternoon." "In German?" "I suppose." "What did she answer?" Another pause. Smaller than the first one on the emergency call, but made of the same material. "I don't remember." Lynette did not accuse him. She asked about the booking. Gideon said the website accepted document uploads automatically. He did not personally inspect every scan before cruise day. He said Marlene's ticket had been on the list when he printed the manifest that morning. He said the prepaid card payment cleared. He said if the document was fake, then he had been deceived too. "Who had access to the manifest before boarding?" Lynette asked. "Myself. Della sometimes. Corbin if he checks seats. The office clerk if I'm busy." "Was the boat full?" "Almost." "Seat 22?" "Reserved." Did anyone scan her ticket at boarding? The scanner was temperamental that day. Rain. Lynette watched his face. That wasn't in your first statement. It was a small thing. We checked tickets by hand when it froze. Who checked hers? I did. Of course, Lynette said softly. The interview ended without an arrest. Gideon left the station through the side door to avoid a reporter who had already heard that the foreign records were wrong. Lynette stood at the window and watched him cross the parking lot. He did not look back, but halfway to his truck, he touched his left wrist, pressing 2 fingers against the skin just above his cuff. It was not guilt by itself. People carry private habits for private reasons. Still, she wrote it down. The crew interviews were less polished. Corbin Tate, the deckhand, admitted that the boarding count had been rushed because a bus group arrived late and the cider urn cracked in the galley. He remembered Gideon waving one woman aboard without scanning her ticket, saying she was the German reservation. Corbin had not seen her face. She wore a burgundy coat with the hood up though the rain had eased. Della Morse, the snack attendant, remembered setting tea near seat 22 because Gideon told her the passenger did not want cider. Della could not remember the woman ordering it herself. The office clerk, Liza Fern, gave the first detail that did not belong to Marlene at all. She said the black suitcase under the bench had been in Gideon's office before the cruise. Lynette asked her to repeat that. Liza flushed. I didn't think anything of it. We keep lost and found bags back there. It was near the printer that afternoon. I remember because I tripped on it when I went to get more receipt paper. What time? Before boarding. Maybe 2. Was it tagged? I don't know. Did you see Gideon take it aboard? No. Did you mention this in October? No one asked where the suitcase was before. They asked if I saw the missing woman. That was how the old case began to rearrange itself. The suitcase was no longer a sad remnant. It was luggage placed in advance. The tea was not a passenger preference. It was a captain's instruction. The fake passport was not a foreign mystery. It was a local lie wearing imported letters. Lynette and Devlin searched the sundial under warrant 2 days later. The boat was moored in heat so heavy that the river stink rose through the boards. Gideon stood on the quay with his lawyer, silent and pale. Tourists gathered near the ice cream stand and pretended not to watch. The detectives found no blood in the cabin, no hidden diary, no simple object that could carry the truth by itself. What they found were absences. The original seat 22 cushion had been replaced in January, supposedly because of a split seam. The stern rope had been thrown out after the safety upgrades. The old ticket scanner was gone, recycled during the booking system migration. Gideon had answers for each loss, and each answer was reasonable alone. Devlin found something small beneath the forward service counter, a strip of burgundy thread caught on the jagged underside of a screw. It might have come from any passenger's coat. It might have been there for years. But when he sealed it in an evidence envelope, Gideon stopped talking to his lawyer and stared. Lynette noticed. Left wrist, she told Devlin later as they drove back to the station. What? He touched it again when you found the thread. They went looking for photographs of Gideon from the weeks after the disappearance. There were plenty. News conferences, charity events, safety meetings, reopening cruise advertisements. In several, a dark leather watch band covered his left wrist. In one photograph taken by a local blogger at the November rescue fundraiser, the band had slipped back. Beneath it was a thin, pale line with 2 darker marks near the center. Not dramatic, not monstrous, just the sort of healing cut a person might get from a sharp clasp or a woman's desperate fingernails. Lynette sent the image to the lab for enhancement, knowing it would probably prove nothing. Then she did what cold cases require. She stopped staring only at the night of the disappearance and began looking for someone else who had vanished around it. At first, the search was discouraging. No woman matching the passport face had been reported missing in the county. No family had called, asking whether a loved one had been on the sundial. The passport photograph itself produced no match in state databases. It appeared to be an altered composite, built from a stock image and softened until it resembled thousands of pale women who might have once stood near water in a raincoat. Then Devlin found a housing notice filed 3 weeks after the cruise by a landlord on Briar Step Lane. Tenant abandoned room. Name: Celia Brandt. Age 32. No forwarding address. Property left behind: 2 chairs, dishes, work boots, box of survey maps. Deposit applied to cleaning. Celia had not been reported missing. Her mother had died years earlier. Her father was unknown on the birth record. She had no siblings listed, no spouse, no children. She worked seasonally for the River Works Authority, measuring bank erosion and marking flood damage after storms. Her supervisor told Devlin she had resigned by text the morning after the Sundial cruise, saying she had accepted private contract work upriver and would send for her things. The text came from Celia's phone. The supervisor thought it was abrupt, but not impossible. Celia was quiet, private, and tired of temporary work. Lynette drove to Briar Step Lane that evening. Celia's old room had already been rented to a nursing student, but the landlord, Mr. Kepley, kept abandoned tenant property in a locked attic because he distrusted throwing anything away. He led Lynette up folding stairs into heat and dust. Celia's things sat in 3 cardboard boxes marked with blue painter's tape. Work shirts, a cracked mug, River Authority manuals, a pair of boots with dried clay in the treads, a stack of paper maps rolled tight with rubber bands. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would have made news crews stand in the rain. At the bottom of the 3rd box, Lynette found a photograph printed on cheap paper. Celia stood on a dock in a green field vest, one hand shielding her eyes from sun, laughing at someone outside the frame. Her hair was shorter than the woman in the passport scan and darker at the roots, but the mouth was similar. So was the small notch at the left eyebrow. Lynette placed the photograph beside the copied passport image on her desk. Devlin stood behind her and said nothing. The woman in the passport had been softened, lightened, thinned by digital blur. Celia in the dock photograph was real. Wind-chapped cheeks, uneven smile, mud on her sleeve. But a person who wanted to create a missing tourist from a real local woman could have started there and hidden what made Celia recognizable. The investigation widened. Celia's bank account showed no activity after the day before the cruise. Her phone last connected to a tower near Lowbridge Quay at 2:52 on the afternoon of the cruise, then to a tower near Amber Lock at 5:26, then never again. The resignation text to her supervisor was sent the next morning through a web messaging service using her number, not from the phone itself. Her landlord had received an envelope with 2 months' rent in cash slid under his office door 3 days after she supposedly left. The handwriting on the envelope was blocky and cautious, spelling his first name wrong. Celia's co-workers added more. She had been anxious that week. She had asked whether old lock houses kept mechanical entry logs. She had borrowed a river gauge key from the authority office and had not returned it. She had argued with someone on her phone in the parking lot saying, "You don't get to make the river lie for you." One co-worker remembered a man picking her up once in an older green truck with a polished wooden dashboard. Gideon Parr drove an older green truck with a polished wooden dashboard. When Lynette asked Gideon about Celia Brandt, he did not pretend not to know her. That would have been too easy to break. He said she had done seasonal measurements near his dock. He said she was competent, reserved, and occasionally difficult. He denied any private relationship. He denied picking her up. He denied knowing she had left town after the cruise. Then Lynette asked why Celia's river gauge key had been used at Amber Lock on the night Marlene Nachname supposedly vanished. That was not yet proven, but Gideon did not know that. His face lost color in a way grief had never produced. "I don't know anything about her keys." Who said keys plural? He looked at his lawyer. The mechanical logs at Amber Lock had not been part of the first investigation because the case had been treated as a fall from a boat. The lock's main operations were digitized, but older maintenance doors still had brass key counters that stamped a paper wheel inside the lockmaster's cabinet each time a service hatch opened. Most officers did not know the counters existed. Celia had known because her work took her into flood infrastructure. Gideon had known because he had grown up on the river. The paper wheel for that week should have been archived at the River Works Authority. It was missing. That missing paper became another absence with weight. The archive clerk remembered Celia asking to see old access records 2 days before the cruise. She remembered Gideon coming in the week after the disappearance with pastries for the office, thanking the authority for help during the search, lingering near the file cabinets while staff answered phones. She had thought he was kind. Lynette did not yet have the wheel, but she had its shadow. She had Celia asking for records. She had Gideon near the records after the search. She had a fake tourist falling at the one place where service hatches, current noise, and old mechanical records met. The false lead of Alder Pym collapsed quietly. His sister finally found a photograph of herself wearing the gray scarf at a winter market 2 years earlier. The retired couple admitted that the man in the brown cap might have been anyone. Alder did not apologize for his anger when Lynette told him he was no longer a suspect. He stood in his doorway with plywood still over one broken window and said, "You all liked me for it, because I already looked ruined." Lynette had no good answer. She drove back to the station with that sentence sitting beside her like another passenger. The harder part was finding Celia's connection to Gideon. It arrived through a place no one had looked because it seemed too ordinary: the copy shop behind the pharmacy. Celia had printed large format maps there. Gideon had printed menus, memorial programs, and tourist brochures. The owner, Thomas Bale, kept job envelopes for a year in shoeboxes under the counter. In Celia's envelope, Lynette found a print order from 3 days before the cruise. Enlarged diagrams of Amber Lock, including the old service tunnel under the west guide wall and the fish bypass built in the 1970s and sealed after repeated clogging. Celia had circled the bypass in blue pencil. In Gideon's envelope, dated the morning of the cruise, was a rush print order for a single page, a blurred copy of a German passport template. Thomas Bale remembered it because Gideon had been annoyed that the first print looked too sharp. He said it was for a prop, Thomas said. Some history performance thing on the boat. Immigrant letters, passports, that sort of thing. I didn't ask. People ask us to print stranger things. Was the name already on it? Lynette asked. I think so. The picture too. He wanted it fuzzier. The copy shop did not keep the digital file, but the job envelope had Gideon's handwritten note. Reduce contrast, roughen edges, print black and white. The note did not prove murder. It did prove he had handled a fake German passport on the day a fake German tourist vanished from his boat. Gideon's lawyer argued that the print job was unrelated, that the page might have been for an abandoned narration display, that owning a fake passport image did not mean staging a disappearance. But public opinion shifted. The same town that had praised Gideon's grief now studied it for seams. People remembered things. Liza remembered the suitcase. Della remembered the tea. Corbin remembered Gideon telling him not to worry about seat 22 because the passenger was shy with English. A passenger remembered seeing the burgundy-coated woman move oddly as she followed Gideon down the rear stairs, as if she were angry but trying not to attract attention. Lynette needed more than revised memories. She needed the place where the story had become physical. Celia's blue-circled lock diagram pointed to the fish bypass. It ran beneath the west side of Amber Lock, a concrete throat built for migrating fish and later barred because debris jammed there after every flood. On current maps, it was marked sealed. In old maintenance notes, It had 3 access points, one from the lock wall, one from the lower service platform, and one from a rusted grate under a willow stand downstream. If someone fell from the stern of the sundial, where Gideon claimed, current would drag them toward the guide wall and possibly downriver. If someone were pushed or carried through the service hatch at the precise moment the lock discharged, the bypass could swallow them into a chamber search crews had never entered. The River Works Authority resisted opening it. The bypass was unstable, filled with silt, and not part of any active search area. It would require pumps, permits, structural bracing, and money the county did not want to spend on a theory born from a fake surname and missing paper wheel. Lynette spent 2 weeks in meetings, where men in short-sleeved shirts said words like liability and probability. Celia's name helped. Fake Marlene had no relatives to speak for her. Celia had been their employee. Her old supervisor, Mira Sand, attended the final meeting with Celia's field notebook in her hands and said the authority had asked Celia to measure dangerous places for years. If one of those places had become her grave, they owed her more than budget caution. The pump started in the first week of August. By then, the case had a different temperature. The town watched from behind barricades, while workers lowered hoses into the old bypass and brought up black water that smelled of iron, algae, and trapped years. Gideon did not come to the key. His lawyer said he had been advised to avoid public spectacle. Lynette stood with Devlin near the lockhouse, hard hat too large over her hair, listening to the pumps thud like a slow mechanical heart. At noon, a worker found the river gauge key. It came up in a sieve of silt, brass darkened almost brown, its numbered tag still legible after washing. Riverworks confirmed it had been issued to Celia Brandt. That alone changed the mood. At 2:35, they found a strip of burgundy fabric wrapped around a bolt inside the bypass chamber. At 4:12, when the sun had shifted behind the lock wall and the first spectators had grown tired, a worker called for everyone to stop. They did not bring Celia out in front of the crowd. Lynette was grateful for that. The remains were recovered behind canvas screens and taken through the service road, while people on the towpath fell silent without fully knowing why. There was no dramatic unveiling, no river giving back a complete answer. There was only a sealed transport van, a detective with mud on her boots, and Mira Sand crying into both hands beside the lockhouse. The medical examiner could not tell the whole story after 9 months in water and silt, but he found enough to contradict an accidental fall. Celia had not drowned in open current. Her body had been confined in the bypass chamber, caught before the river could carry her away. There was evidence of injury before submersion, blunt and non-specific, not the shattering violence of a fall against lockstones. Fibers in the burgundy fabric matched the thread found under the sundial's service counter. The coat itself had once been Celia's. Her landlord identified it from a photograph taken the previous winter, when she had worn it while helping clear flood debris. The fake tourist was no longer a ghost. She had a name. Celia Brandt had walked through town, paid rent, measured water lines, argued in parking lots, and carried maps in the back seat of her aging hatchback. The world had failed to miss her because Gideon had given everyone a more dramatic woman to search for. The motive surfaced in pieces, as most motives do when they are not slogans. Celia had been mapping erosion near Gideon's private dock because the county was considering moving the cruise departures after repeated complaints about the narrow quay. During that work, she found that someone had been opening a restricted side sluice at night to scour silt from the channel leading to Gideon's dock, illegally deepening it and pushing sediment toward a protected marsh. The work would have cost thousands if done legally. Done secretly, it preserved Gideon's business and damaged everyone else's riverbank. Celia traced the openings through scattered mechanical marks, missing paper wheels, and water readings that made no sense unless the river had been forced to behave differently. Gideon had not meant for the first conversation to become fatal. That was what he said later, and perhaps it was the only sentence of his confession that still contained some frightened human truth. He had arranged for Celia to board under the fake German reservation, so no one would connect her to him if she came to the boat after hours. He told her he would pay her, give her the missing records, and stop opening the sluice. He said he used the fake identity because he was embarrassed by their private meetings and afraid the authority would misunderstand. Celia came because she needed proof more than apology. She wore the burgundy coat because it was raining, not because she was playing a role. Gideon walked her to seat 22 until the boat was away from the dock. To the passengers, she became the quiet foreign woman because Gideon had already named her that. The argument happened below, near the service counter, after Amber Locke came into view. Celia told him she had copied the diagrams. She told him she had given one envelope to someone else, though that part was a bluff. Gideon reached for her field bag. She pulled away. The fountain pen from the staged canvas bag was not hers. It had been placed there later. But the cut on Gideon's wrist came from Celia's brass key tag when she swung the lanyard between them. He struck her. He said it was once. The evidence could not prove otherwise. When she fell against the metal edge of the service counter and did not rise, the lie he had prepared as cover for a meeting became cover for a death. He still had passengers above him, a crew pouring cider, a lock approaching, and a fake German woman on the manifest. He moved with the calm of a man trained by decades of docking under pressure. He took Celia through the lower service hatch when the engines and lock discharge covered the noise. He used the key she had brought, opened the old bypass access, and let the current take what he could not carry in his conscience. Then he returned to the cabin, told Della to leave tea at seat 22, and later carried the canvas bag into the dock office like a relic. He might have escaped forever if he had chosen a better name. That was the part people repeated with disbelief, as if the whole case had been solved by a joke. Lynette hated that version. The name mattered. Yes, Nachname opened the door. But Celia was found because an analyst respected a language detail others had ignored, because a landlord kept boxes, because a copy shop owner kept envelopes, because a supervisor remembered a sentence about the river lying, because a county finally pumped out a place it had not wanted to enter. A lie does not collapse from one crack. It collapses when enough people stop stepping around the crack. Gideon's confession came after the bypass recovery and the copy shop warrant, but before trial. He gave it in the same interview room where he had once looked wounded by the idea that there had been no Marlene. This time, he did not wear his watch. The scar on his wrist was faint but visible. Lynette sat across from him with Celia's photograph on the table, the one from the dock where she laughed into sunlight. "I didn't invent her to kill Celia," he said. "No," Lynette said. "You invented her so Celia could disappear if you needed her to." He closed his eyes, and that was the closest he came to admitting the difference. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter, evidence tampering, obstruction, and environmental crimes connected to the sluice openings. The charge disappointed some people and relieved others. Murder was argued in newspapers and at grocery counters by people who had never read the full file. Lynette did not argue with them. She had learned long ago that justice often arrives with seams showing. Celia was not alive. Gideon was not free. The river would be repaired slowly, with funds taken from the sale of the sundial and Gideon's dock property. It wasn't enough. It was what the law could hold. Alder Pym received a public apology from the sheriff's office, written in language so polished it almost had no weight. He framed it crookedly in his shed beside the gray scarf and told reporters to leave him alone unless they planned to fix his window. Some did. Most did not. Mira Sand packed Celia's maps in archival sleeves and kept one enlarged diagram of Amber Locke in the Riverworks office, not as a memorial display, but as a working document. She was right about the flow, Mira said when Lynette visited months later. That should be written somewhere. Lynette thought it was, in a way. It was written in the reopened bypass, in the repaired marsh bank, in the absence of secret night openings, in every future measurement, taken honestly because Celia had refused to let a river be falsified. The sundial never cruised again under that name. After the county auction, someone bought the hole and moved it downstream to be converted into a floating restaurant. The brass lamps were stripped. The painted maps were removed. For a while, the outline of the old lettering remained visible under fresh primer, a shadow name on the side of the boat. People at Lowbridge Quay still pointed to Amber Lock when telling the story, but they told it differently after the trial. Not as the sad mystery of a foreign woman taken by water, not as the haunted burden of a noble captain. They told it as the case of the woman whose first disappearance was so quiet that a louder one had to be invented over it. On the first anniversary of the cruise, Lynette walked the towpath alone just before evening. The tourist season had returned, because towns survive by sanding down their horrors until visitors can stand near them and buy postcards. A different boat moved upriver, smaller and plain, with new rails and a crew that counted passengers twice before leaving the dock. The crest was low, green-brown, flecked with cottonwood seed. At Amber Lock, the repaired service hatch held a bright new seal. Lynette stood there for a while with Celia's file closed under her arm. She thought about the first night, the floodlights, the volunteers calling Marlene into the rain. She thought about how many times the world is willing to search for the person named in the story, and how slowly it turns toward the person left outside it. Celia had been present from the beginning, not in the passport, not in the guidebook, not in the sad staged back, but in the nervous choices Gideon made whenever a question got too close to the river's machinery. The name Marlene Knockname remained in the file, crossed through with a single black line. Lynette had asked that it not be deleted. A false name could still testify. It testified to arrogance, to ignorance, to the belief that grief could be manufactured with a coat, a suitcase, and a foreign-looking word. It testified to the fact that the first version of a disappearance is not always a doorway into truth. Sometimes it is a wall, built quickly in the rain, while everyone is too frightened to notice the bricks do not fit. When Lynette finally turned back toward the quay, the evening lights had begun trembling on the river again, much as they had 9 months before, when Gideon Parr carried a canvas bag into the dock office and asked the town to mourn a woman who had never existed. This time, the water gave back no sound, except its own steady movement past the lock wall. It did not confess. It did not apologize. It simply moved around the repaired concrete, carrying leaves, reflections, and the name of Celia Brandt into a town that, at last, knew whom it had lost.